So this is a podcast overview for Chapter 4, Stress, Illness, and the Immune System. So for this chapter, the first thing is to understand the differences between infection, disease, illness, and sickness. Sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, and it can get confusing as to what each actually means. There's a distinct difference between each, so just be sure that you're familiar with how these relate to one another, as well as how they are differentiated from one another. Also be able to explain what the sick role is that a person adapts when they are ill, and what's involved in his or her illness behavior. When a person is ill, they take on different aspects of behavior that tell other people or signal to other people that they're ill. What are those? And how do we as society define what happens when somebody gets sick? Every culture is different in how they treat sickness. So that's where we get the sick role. What is it defined as in our culture? How do we describe people when they're sick? What are they obligated to do or not to do? What are the secondary gains of illness? So we don't typically associate illness with having any kind of gains, but they do, and they're called secondary gains because it's something that kind of comes about due to the illness, but it can benefit the person. So be able to explain what those are exactly. Then be able to distinguish between various methodological designs of research examining stress and illness. So the beginning part of the chapter covers the different types of research designs that are used when studying stress and illness. And this is probably a little bit of a recap. If you've taken intro psych or you've taken research methods, you're going to know some of this already, but it covers cross-sectional designs, experimental designs, correlational designs. I think there's a couple other ones in there. And just really briefly touches on each. And this question is actually tied to the discussion for this week, where you're going to be asked to come up with a research design for something. So pay particular attention to this one when you get to it in the reading. Know what the elements are to each research design and what each type of design might be used. Okay, so when would I use a correlational design? When would I use experimental study? What would be sort of the pros and cons of each? Then we're going to move into understanding the life events model of stress and illness, which is very similar to what we looked at in a previous chapter, life events happening to a person, and each one getting sort of like being assigned a number, a category of how severe they would affect a person's life. And so this is just one type of model that we use to understand various stressors and the toll that they take on our body, on us, in terms of manifesting into illness. We also look at life change units, LCUs, are used a lot in self-reported measures of stress. So somebody kind of reporting on how many different life changes they've been through, getting a divorce, getting a new job, having a baby, going back to school. Those are all kind of life change events. And so they're issued a number. And so it's explained in the chapter how they go about coming up with those numbers, how they developed that. So be familiar with that. And then it's going to recap a little bit on the social readjustment rating scale, which actually was mentioned in the previous chapter. This was developed by Holmes and Rahi. And it's used a little differently from the life events and difficulty schedule, which is the LEDS. I know lots of acronyms in this chapter. So be able to distinguish between these two. How are they different and how are they used? Both are very popular measures used in health psychology, used in stress research and life events research, but they give like slightly different takes on the stressors a person is going through and how that affects them. Then we're going to turn to looking at the role of daily hassles in stress. So these are kind of like daily things we deal with that aren't considered life events. They might be things like waiting in line, sitting in traffic, paying bills, dealing with a difficult roommate, daily kind of little stressors. But understand how the measurement of these daily hassles can be problematic. The way in which we ask people about their daily hassles tends to be a little problematic in how people report them. There's not good consistency across the board, some validity, reliability issues, but just understanding that and then understanding the role that daily hassles play in stress. They've often been underestimated in terms of how much damage they do, but chronically over the life term, if a person is not dealing well with those daily hassles, it can affect them negatively over time. Know what the term psychoneuroimmunology refers to. We're going to be kind of spending the rest of the chapter is on psychoneuroimmunology, which is basically kind of like the intersection between psychology, our mental health, our neural system that you just learned about. We learned about the nervous system, how neurons kind of communicate, and then our immune system, the immunology segment of that. So it's the intersection of all of those kind of coming together. So it really is the area of study that looks at how our body communicates with itself, pretty much, the different systems of our body. I would say the next kind of segments of the chapter get very specific. These would be good areas to keep good notes. Note cards will be helpful. If you do not have a physiology background or a bio background, some of these terms are going to be very new to you and can get a little confusing. So this is definitely one of those weeks where spending a good amount of time on these concepts is going to pay off. And we don't have a test this week, so I really suggest keeping those note cards with you and reviewing them this week and next week, all up until you have your next exams. Get some time with this material. So we're going to start getting into the different parts of the immune system, break it down into all its components, learning about what the innate immune system is and how that differs from the adaptive immune system. Our body was built with an ability to fight, any kind of invaders that might pose a risk or threat to our health. That is an innate thing that we are given. Whereas an adaptive immune system is more like as we live, as we exist as humans, our bodies adapt. They learn to withstand germs, and we get sick, and that makes us stronger for the next time. So that's more adaptive. So understand kind of what those differences are between those. And then the role of all the sites, granulocytes, monocytes, and lymphocytes. What is the role that each of them play in the immune system? What is the positive and negative role of inflammation? Inflammation in our immune system can be good in some regards and bad in others. Inflammation generally is a response to a pathogen, to something that doesn't belong there. And it's the body's response to kind of flush it out or get it out. But if it becomes chronic and that inflammation doesn't go away, over the long term, it can be very harmful to our health. And, we think of diseases like rheumatoid arthritis as basically chronic inflammation of your joints. It's really the body in our any kind of arthritis. The body is almost attacking itself. It's becoming inflammatory when it really shouldn't be, and causing pain. Know about all the various players in the immune response. So there's so many different cells that are specialized to do unique jobs within the immune system. They only get triggered, or they only come into play when it's their time. We've got natural killer cells, helper T cells, T cytotoxic cells, CD4 cells, B cells, antibodies, and immunoglobulins. So that's a lot. A lot of them overlap. They do similar things, and yet they each have specialized sorts of functions. So again, note cards is going to be really essential. Even creating a chart that lists them all out, compare and contrast, might be a helpful way to study these than just like definition by definition. Understanding cellular mediated immunity and humoral immunity strategies of the immune system. These are just our immune system's two kind of unique ways for fighting off injury or fighting off infection. They're kind of like go-to strategies that the immune system uses in its attack against infection. Explaining how the immune system operates on acute and chronic stressors. So when we have a short-term stressor, what is the immune system's response? And when we're faced with a chronic kind of lifelong stressor, how does it respond? And as you're going to see, kind of preparing us for the next chapter, it's those chronic stressors that really do the most damage. Our body is really nicely designed to deal with acute stressors, very effectively actually, but when a stressor becomes chronic, that's where our body starts to wear down. And then we get into the role of immunosuppression. So it's really, the suppression of the immune system due to those chronic stressors, due to specific types of stressors. So, right, there's very unique types of stressors that can lead to immunosuppression. Things like caring for a disabled child, or a parent, who's sick and ailing and requires, 24/7 supervision. A chronic illness, dealing with a relationship over the long term that's very toxic and negative and bad. There's a lot, living in poverty. These are all types of stressors that cause immunosuppression and have been linked to pretty much the body trying its best to respond to all of those things we learned about last chapter that the body does when we're stressed, right? The over-release of certain types of hormones that can damage us over time. They're meant to protect us in the short term, but the chronic activation of cortisol in the body is not good, causes inflammation, causes a lot of problems. And over time, it prevents the immune system from doing its job. And that's where we get immunosuppression. And then lastly, be familiar with the various ways that we can strengthen and protect the immune system. And what better time to be talking about it than during a pandemic? How can we, as people, protect ourselves and live healthy, and try to boost our immune system and do all that we can to protect it. Okay, that sums up the objectives for Chapter 4.